What if I told you that the anxiety you feel, the anger you can't control, the guilt that haunts you, isn't caused by your job, your relationships, or your past, but by a hidden part of yourself you've been running from your entire life? This free course dives into Carl Jung's most powerful and terrifying insight, the shadow. And if you're brave enough to face it, you might just free yourself from a lifetime of emotional suffering. But be warned, this is not for the faint of heart. This is a free course that dives straight and deeply into the Carl Gustav Jung's psychology's most potent ideas, all aimed at helping you become emotionally unbreakable and master your shadow. Who should watch through to the very end, overcoming any kind of anxiety, despair, guilt, wrath, grief, or psychological distress for people who are already aware that they are unable to stop repeating self-destructive behavior patterns, in those who believe that despite their best efforts, they attempt, but they are unable to get the emotional control they want from those who carry. This article is for you if you suffer from pains that they cannot identify, but that affect them daily. Throughout this video, you will learn how the shadow works in silence and gain a clear, practical understanding of what it is. Influences your ideas, feelings, and impulses. You'll learn why so many of the feelings you are unable to regulate, such as angry outbursts or anxiety attacks, chronic guilt, and unexplained unhappiness, are not caused by outside circumstances, but rather by unresolved issues within yourself. And more significantly, you will discover how to confront all of this not with flimsy methods of optimistic thinking, but with a genuine, deep, and transforming approach, which is founded on more than a century of in-depth psychology that teaches you to face the most obscure aspects of your mind and incorporate them. This is not a video to be watched passively. Pause as needed, make notes, return, and watch again, since every idea discussed here has the potential to how you perceive the world and yourself, but only if you put it into practice. Simply observing is insufficient. It's a personal endeavor that calls for bravery, and while discomfort is inevitable, you will discover why the repression of the shadow is necessary for the emotional liberation you want. On the other side of that discomfort is the cause of a lot of mental illnesses, and the way the persona conceals you demonstrate to the world how the archetypes exacerbate your emotional vulnerability, of how the collective unconscious shows up in your day-to-day activities, and how all of this information may be converted into this comprehensive course provides a strong basis for anybody interested in practical action, wanting to begin or continue the individuation process, which Jung defined as the real if you truly want to be free. The goal of human life is to become who you are today. Protect yourself from the mental anguish that follows you if you wish to be someone who can handle the most challenging feelings without letting them ruin you. You're in the correct spot, but keep in mind that only those who observe. Let's begin. Practice everything you've learned here till the finish to receive tangible results. Carl Gustav Jung dubbed the collection of things you reject the shadow, suppress, or just refuse to admit in yourself, and this is where we really start. Knowing the nature of the shadow and the reasons behind its destructive power control over your emotional life, consider the following. Since you were a young child, your parents, school, and society have all taught you about what is acceptable and what's not. You receive accolades for being kind and courteous, obedient. You receive criticism or punishment for displaying selfishness, enmity, or rage, intense sadness, feelings deemed undesirable or improper. And like any youngster, you swiftly discover that some feelings and actions must be concealed and pushed into the shadows. This is how the shadow seems in the recesses of your mind. Yet what occurs to all of the suppressed material? It does not vanish. On the contrary, it continues to grow in the unconscious, influencing your responses, and the shadow is the culmination of all these suppressed facets of the dark side of personality. Is something you do not want to witness, yet it is inevitable. Affects your anxiety, which is frequently a covert sign of the shadow depression. Accumulation of unresolved feelings imprisoned in the shadows of the mind, exploding in rage and screaming from suppressed areas. That self-sabotage is an internal onslaught from the shadows that cannot be ignored any longer. The shadow is not inherently bad, rather, it works against the ego's conscious objectives, includes elements that, when properly incorporated, might actually be sources of strength and innovation. But as long as since the shadow is not acknowledged, it will continue to function independently, and this explains why so many people are caught in unfathomable cycles of emotional suffering. Self-destructive urges and uncontrollable emotions overwhelm them, patterns of conduct that recur like a never-ending nightmare. And the reality is that not many people have the bravery to acknowledge that. You are more than the self-image you have created. In addition to your strengths and weaknesses, you are also what you are most afraid to acknowledge, because your ability to integrate emotionally is weakened the more you avoid it. The shadow is not about realizing that rage and envy are necessary for becoming entire and flawless. The human experience includes feelings of fear and a need for control. You can only stop these elements from destroying your life by bringing them to your attention. The next minutes will provide you with a clearer understanding of how the shadows are affecting your day-to-day activities. It manipulates your feelings and responses in ways you're not even aware of if you believe you have emotional control. Get ready for a painful revelation in the following section. Examine the ways in which the shadow influences your feelings and choices, as well as the reasons behind them. Being emotionally unbreakable while you are unaware this technique is impossible. It's time to realize how the shadow affects your life in a much more direct manner now that you know what it is. You may think that the shadow is an abstract idea that manifests itself daily, particularly in your feelings and choices. Jung clarified that as long as we don't shape our emotions, impulses, and decisions, bring our unconscious mind into awareness, it will continue to guide our lives, and we will refer to it as fate. This is the secret to comprehending why so many emotions seem to be out of your control, since you were taught to suppress some emotions, such as fear, jealousy, rage, and selfishness, socially objectionable desires. But suppressed behavior does not go away, it continues to exist, full of emotional energy, functioning independently through when you experience worry that you are unable to articulate. You frequently grapple with similar to unacknowledged shadow content, excessive outbursts of intense fury, constant sorrow, and despair with no obvious reason, are indicators that the Jung warned that repressed contents do not cease, since the shadow is in charge in psychology of the unconscious. They become independent forces that have the ability to enter and take control of consciousness at any time in order to exist. This explains why a lot of emotional responses appear to occur spontaneously. They are reactions to unconscious complexes, which are pieces of the psyche that are controlled by the shadow. This process, which repeats damaging patterns in relationships, also has a significant impact on the decisions you make. Destroying career possibilities and embracing negative ideas about oneself. Shadow content that you haven't included is the source of this. As long as you feel that you have complete control over your feelings and decisions without first confronting your shadow, will be experiencing delusion. Your shadow doesn't go away simply because you disregard or justify your feelings. On the contrary, they become stronger in the gloom. But the good news is that this cycle can be broken, and it starts with regaining emotional awareness, begins with recognizing the shadow's patterns, control, and genuinely developing into a resilient, complete being. But there is the main barrier that keeps most people from embarking on this trip is the identity you created for social approval, protecting in order to blend, and ultimately serves to strengthen the shadow's power. Now pay close attention, because this is crucial. If you've read this far, you're undoubtedly wondering, how can I truly put all of this into practice in my life? Because simply knowing nothing changes. Practice is what makes you different, which is precisely why I wrote a 30-day guide to individuation called Dialogues with the Unconscious. This is a 30-day practical guide, not in a book to read and forget, offering quick, easy, and effective daily workouts that you can complete in a matter of minutes. You only need daily dedication. You don't require hours of free time. Each activity is intended to assist you in establishing a connection with your unconscious and beginning to integrate your shadow in a regular manner, in a useful manner. And this ebook is the ideal accompaniment for readers of Beyond the Shadow. Dialogues is the daily route to assist you in putting this knowledge into practice in real life. If Beyond the Shadow is the map, listen, there's a 10% launch discount on it right now. But don't put off clicking if you're genuinely dedicated to completing this task. Get your copy immediately by clicking the link in the pinned comment and begin your transformational journey in real life. Understanding the role of the persona is crucial to comprehending how the shadow keeps influence over your life. Jung characterizes the persona as a system of social masks that you have constructed in order to survive and adjust to the world. In other words, adaptation or an interaction with the outside environment is the portraying yourself as someone who is loved, respected, or welcomed it as who you have trained to pretend to be rather than who you really are, because as a child, you observe that some actions result in praise while others cause criticism or rejection. Over time, this adaptation teaches you to conceal the unpleasant parts and highlight the positive ones, crystallizes you as an idealized version of yourself wearing persona-like armor that you bring to social interactions, employment, and relationships. But here's the issue. Whatever you suppress in order to keep this mask on is ultimately pushed into the shadow. The more psychological the persona, the more rigid and flawless it is. Material builds up in the unconscious mind shadow, so those who appear incredibly composed, upbeat, and flawless in public battle in private with severe anxiety, depression, irascible rage, or the cost of maintaining an idealized persona is an oppressive feeling of emptiness. Extremely elevated in contemporary man seeking a soul, Jung cautions that the persona is a compromise with society, but it's also a lie to ourselves, since it separates us from the more you think you are your persona, the more you lose touch with who we really are, from your true self, and the more susceptible you are to the shadow's tricks. This internal struggle causes ongoing emotional exhaustion, and you have to spend energy attempting to keep in all those suppressed parts of the psyche require care. The fake picture is of the shadow will always find a way to appear in a game that cannot be won, whether through emotional breakdowns, impulsive actions, or physical signs. The solution: begin removing the mask and acknowledge that you are not the character. You are a whole human being with shadows and lights, and combining these elements is the first step toward achieving full emotional freedom, and the only method to do so is becoming aware of the components of your shadow and how it shows up in your day-to-day activities. Now that you know how the shadow works in the next section as the characters engage, it's time to take a critical step, learning to identify your shadow in daily life. Jung clarified that the shadow appears anytime we are overcome by strong, illogical emotions. He states in Aion that the shadow manifests in impetuous responses, in moments of conduct and the assumptions we make about other people. To put it another way, you don't need to enter a cave and locate the shadow, simply observe your own daily responses. Here are some useful. For instance, let's say you suddenly and excessively hate someone at something as simple as a gesture, or remark at work can make you angry. Think of it as overblown. This is a blatant indication of projection. The thing you're detesting about that other person is actually a suppressed part of you that you reject. Yet another example, and you scornfully condemn those who display claiming to be weak or dramatic because to their emotional fragility. However, if you dig deeper, you may find that you had suppressed your sensitivity for years because you were afraid of being viewed as weak as something you cannot put up with in other people. Identifying in yourself circumstances such as feeling envious of someone else's achievement, experiencing overwhelming guilt for minor errors, and throwing tantrums of chronic procrastination, or avoiding crucial encounters due to jealousy. These could all be manifestations of the shadow within man. His symbols, Jung, and his according to experts, dreams are among the most straightforward means of gaining access to shadow content. Recurrent dreams, in which there are clashes and a lack of control with ferocious creatures or dark shadows, typically suggest that suppressed. Another sign that material is attempting to surface is to pay attention to your body. Persistent tension, inexplicable pain, and ongoing exhaustion are symptoms that frequently represent the psychic energy that has been blocked by efforts to keep shady elements out of awareness. Thus, honest self-observation is the key to identifying your shadow. Consider what emotions control me and what inexplicably irritates me in other people. What actions, without my will, do I feel guilty about after they occur? And what aspects of them do I conceal myself to preserve my social reputation? This work calls for bravery. Admitting that you are angry, envious, afraid, or unkind is uncomfortable. But as long as you do not acknowledge these factors will still have sway over you. But recognizing the shadow is only the first step. The most difficult and subsequent stage is to deliberately face it, and in order to do so, one must comprehend how the procedure for facing the shadow works, which you will learn about in the following section. Although acknowledging the shadow is a necessary first step, real change occurs during the encounter, and this is where Jung stated categorically that this step cannot be avoided. If he cautions, you want to become a complete individual in the undiscovered self. Individualization is accomplished by facing the shadow head-on rather than ignoring it. Bravery. But what does it actually mean to face the shadow head-on? Is to acknowledge the discomfort and unavoidability of this process, The only thing you can decide is whether you will confront the darkness knowingly or accidentally. Remain under its influence when you start exposing these sinister materials. Two strong emotional responses emerge: humiliation, guilt, fear, and rage. Many give up here, withdrawing into the character. But it's exactly now that here are some real-world examples to help you comprehend that when you are envious of coworkers who succeed, your first reaction is to deny, or the real confrontation is to acknowledge without apology that I don't care about that. Judging someone who is envious and asking yourself, what does it indicate about my own unspoken aspiration and frustrations? And where does it originate? Perhaps consider that you struggle consistently to establish boundaries and face the darkness you are aware of. That suppressed rage and a severe fear of rejection are the root causes of this habit. For having previously endured relentless disrespect, embracing this rage, it is typical throughout this confrontation and is considered legitimate to move through multiple stages. Resist the need to justify or downplay the negative features of resistance. Emotions of shame or guilt appear when acknowledging and accepting aspects of oneself that are unacceptable. These elements as valid components of the integration of the psyche, progressive assimilation of these materials, which lowers their level of independence, highlighted that this path is not straight line, characterizing the encounter with the shadow as an ongoing integration process that permeates every aspect of existence. There is never a time when the shadow is vanquished. Instead, there is an ongoing dedication to reflective writing, and dream analysis are useful techniques for this work's discussion and integration. Deep meditation, Jungian psychotherapy, and most importantly, the genuine desire to examine oneself honestly and brutally, but be mindful of any new information during the confrontation. Deep archetypes that reside in the collective unconscious are revealed by psychic components, start to materialize and play a vital part in this process. In the next section, you will comprehend how the archetypes that appear along this road, including trickster and anima animus self, can both hasten and impede the shadow's incorporation as you continue to face your shadow. A deep-seated occurrence is inevitable. Collective unconscious archetypes start to show themselves and affect your process. Jung conducted in-depth research on these universal behavioral patterns and symbolic images in the archetypes, and he claims that archetypes are universal in the collective unconscious, hereditary mental systems that serve as experiences organizing. Frameworks for archetypes frequently show themselves with special strength during the confrontation with the shadow. Anima, animus, and self happen without aspects of the unconscious, mainly the shadow, being revealed. In other words, you know genuine emotional development until you confront, accept your shadow. But what does in practical terms? Consider a person who has battled with angry outbursts all of their life following by assimilating the shadow. This individual does not turn into a passive or uninterested entity. Rather, they start to acknowledge rage as a natural emotion and learn how to express it in a thoughtful and appropriate manner. This strengthens and completes them emotionally. An additional example would be someone who has a tendency prior to working on the shadow. They steer clear of social occasions because they were gripped by social anxiety, an unreasonable dread of being judged by including the shadow elements associated with. They progressively start exposing themselves to scenarios involving uneasiness and the need for approval. With A, these changes occur because integrating the shadow allows you to regain pieces of yourself, including a new sense of confidence. Disconnected parts of the psyche, which releases psychic energy that was previously used for repression. As a result, you start acting in a more genuine manner and in line with your true self. And not only to keep up a facade more strong, emotionally resilient feelings no longer control you because you recognize them as normal aspects of your personality to become less reactive. When you stop projecting your personal triggers on other people, you become a more complete version of yourself. Recognize that you are a full human being with lights and shadows that provide a deep sense of inner Jung rights. The acceptance of the dark side in modern man in search of a soul of oneself fortifies the person as they start to relate more truthfully, and people who achieve this degree of unity in their lives become emotionally unshakable, not because they no longer experience challenging emotions, but rather because they are no longer subject to their influence. Possess a sense of solidity and presence that is uncommon in a society where the majority still run from their own shadow. But how can this be used in daily life? How to develop your perception so that you may continue to include the shadow into your everyday activities without reverting to your previous habits. Be the subject of the following sections, practical applications to foster a consistent and integration of the shadow in a profound state of awareness is a continuous process. When it comes to integration, there is no point at which you can declare, okay, I'm done, a constant process. And the true difficulty lies in maintaining that awareness in your day-to-day activities. How do you achieve that? First and foremost, it is crucial to develop a stance of consistent according to Jung's psychology of the unconscious. Self-observation reveals that what is not brought to, since fate continues to play a role in consciousness, you must train your perception to determine when ominous material attempts to surface in feelings of annoyance, jealousy, dread, and self-destructs. Here are some specific actions you can take to have a deliberate internal conversation. Begin observing your natural responses to feelings of rage, jealousy, or instead of suppressing your feelings of shame, talk to yourself about them and ask yourself, what is this feeling attempting to convey to me about myself? To introspective pieces, spend a few minutes every day writing about events that cause strong emotional responses. You establish a secure environment to investigate the shadow's contents and lessen its unconscious influence. Jung highlighted 3 dream analyses in humans, and they keep a dream notebook because symbols in dreams are direct access points to the unconscious. Look for recurring symbols, images, and characters that arouse intense feelings. These are important indicators of what the shadow wishes to disclose about mindfulness. By cultivating present moment awareness, mindfulness techniques enable you to recognize your own tendencies without by relating to them. A gap is created between impulse and reaction, which is necessary for working with relationships in shadow integration. 5. When you have a strong antipathy for someone, use their relationships as a laboratory. Examine whether someone's appreciation or moral assessment of you reveals anything. You don't recognize yourself by setting limits, both internal and external. Integration requires the ability to create healthy boundaries and say no to a lot of dark information. When you continuously transgress yourself in order to appease others or conform to the 7 periodic reviews of the persona, ask yourself from time to time, what aspects of myself I'm attempting to conceal beneath my present? What facets of my personality am I giving up to preserve my social image, persona? Using these strategies does not guarantee that you won't be taken by surprise by dark content in the future, but it does mean that when it occurs, you'll be more equipped to handle it mindfully rather than feeling overpowered by every cycle of awareness. The influence of the shadows on you reduces your emotional being. Intelligent makes you a more genuine, complete, and independent individual. However, it's crucial to keep in mind that this is a road that calls for constant dedication, because the shadow is crafty and may adapt to different hiding places. The work of integration is a continuous process, and to wrap up this course, in the following section, we will consider the reasons why mastering the shadow is a one-way process, and the consequences that mastering the shadow is a one-way road for those who choose to disregard it. And this must be made very evident as soon as you begin to expose the negative parts of your emotions and brain. You can no longer pretend, since you suppress the ideas and impulses you believe were inappropriate. You don't give them the cozy impression that you are merely a good guy with light attributes. Transcend their shortcomings, they fall apart, and what replaces them is not perfection, but the reality of a human being as a whole is far more potent, able to identify their shadows and, as a result, more liberated. The function of the shadow is to compensate. Jung wrote in the Undiscovered Self for consciousness's lopsided perspective. Its absorption results in a mental equilibrium that cannot be accomplished by any other method, meaning that without this effort, you will stay unbalanced and susceptible to the subconscious tendencies that undermine your existence. It costs a lot to ignore the shadow, therefore you can try to keep living behind your identity, projecting your fears onto other people who will judge what you don't accept about yourself when you're running away from unpleasant feelings. But the price will be persistent mental health issues, such as persistent anxiety, depression, or compulsive behaviors, poisonous patterns of relationships, all of which flourish in the shadows of the. On the other hand, unintegrated shadows are those who take this procedure seriously, undergo a significant metamorphosis, and develop emotional resilience, become less susceptible to manipulation by others and by your own feelings. You start acting with greater honesty and authenticity. You achieve inner peace independent of obtaining favor from others. You learn to utilize even your darker sides as sources of inspiration and power. But don't be duped. This does not imply that you eventually complete the task. As Jung noted in Aion, the process by which new layers of personality grow during life is known as integration of the shadow. Will show up as you develop, and the more you mature, the more capable you are of. This is not a road, since it requires maturity and fortitude to face these new layers. For those who would rather live a conscious life, it is for the weak. For those who realize that emotional liberation can only be achieved by accepting all of your humanity, not just what you want the world to see. Now, in the comments section, I would need you to commit to this procedure. I'm willing to think that putting this into writing is a potent and symbolic first step to facing my shadow. Declare your resolve to keep going in this direction, and if this video spoke to you, don't stop here. Go on to the next film on the channel, which is a crucial component of your path and will enhance your understanding of what the shadow performs today. Continue to exist, but you can surpass it today. I'm moving on.